That's cinema, baby.
No, Mr. Wilson. I don't have to take that kind of talk from anyone.
That's right, you don't. How about going outside and trying to kick me around?
I'm not supposed to fight with the guests, Mr. Wilson.
I'm not a guest tonight, you yellow bastard. I happen to be an intruder.
Hello, and how do you guys start?
You wait 5 seconds.
Fuck, we did that already.
All right. Hello, and welcome to The Good, the Pod, and the Ugly, a film podcast where we pair movies to garner a better understanding of the filmographies of notable directors or actors, typically one artist or creator per season, often with guests. I'm your co-host, Ken.
Ken, you sound very tightly wound. I'm your other co-host, Thomas. I'm very concerned for you. Why would you be so upset at the top of the show?
Perhaps because I co-host Ryan, apparently.
Provisional.
Yes,
Marginal
provisional.
co-host.
Now provisional probationary co-host.
Yeah.
Ryan cannot apparently introduce a podcast, which I think is kind of part of the deal. If you're actually hosting a podcast, you need to be able to introduce it.
And maybe I've ever listened to it. Yeah. And so now we have
listened to it. To be clear, I just don't listen to every episode, and I don't listen to the episodes I'm on. But I have heard many episodes of the show, at least 50.
And an episode, so you've probably heard this person's voice. Jack, how you doing, buddy?
I'm going to throw up.
Oh, what a rough start on The Good, the Pod, the Ugly, where we do a deep dive on the paired films, unpaired films. We pair the films so we can have a better understanding of the films themselves because we add our own insights. God damn it, Kent. Who are we talking about this season and what films are we watching this week? We've already watched one of them.
This week's pairs are Danju and Bartlett.
Okay. I think I quit.
We are doing 4x4 3, and 4x4 is where we each pick a director, totaling 4, and pick four films that we feel are emblematic of their entire filmography. So we're kind of condensing entire careers into 4 films. The first one that we're doing this season is Robert Aldrich, my pick. And we are on the last Aldrich, The Longest Yard, that we'll be covering. And we paired it with last week's film, The Dirty Dozen. The Longest Yard, if you haven't seen it, is not the Adam Sandler version, although Burt Reynolds is in that as well. It's about a disgraced former NFL MVP who gets in some trouble, goes to jail, and a warden who has a semi-pro team filled with guards cajoles him into getting a team of convicts together to tune up for the guards to win a national championship. And Reynolds' character might sell the team out. That's the central conflict.
Very good.
Ahead of us talking too much about the plot of the film, just a quick trigger warning for the listener. In discussing the film, we will be discussing domestic violence, police, violence, that's not necessarily redundant, Confederate flags, the N-word, and pervy 70s stuff, including half mustaches, lynching big hair on women, and Burt Reynolds himself.
Mm-hmm. Woo! Yeah. Burt Reynolds is Paul Crew, Wrecking Crew.
Ooh, I've never, so I grew up on like Smokey and the Bandit, you know? I feel like this is the first time I truly understand how Burt Reynolds was such a cultural phenomena. He is so charismatic in this role. And it's just like, it's not like any other kind of charisma I've ever really seen an American actor have.
This was at his cinematic peak as far as being a unusual leading man who is very distinct, for sure.
He's so cool.
So this movie came out in 1974, the same year as a terrible film, Thunderbolt and Lightfoot. I think I got that right. I always get that flipped. I don't think we talked about the Sugarland Express, which was the
Pretty
first feature by Spielberg.
Probably bad because Spielberg sucks.
But I take it, Ken, that you've seen this film at least once before.
I think The Longest Yard is the greatest sports movie of all time, and it's probably on my top 10 all-time favorite movies. And watching it last night, one of those rare movies that you've seen so much and you love so much that you can almost feel endorphins being released in your brain when you're watching it because it's such a comfort. Definitely one of those movies. Yeah, all-time favorite. What about you, Thomas?
I think this is my first time watching it all the way. Well, yeah, I think that this was my first time watching it. Ryan?
Okay.
Yeah, first time, and I don't think I ever would have seen it if not for this podcast.
Jack?
Second or third time, also one of my all-time favorite movies, and yeah, the serotonin that gets released in your brain from the last 45 minutes is something else.
Remarkable.
Yeah.
You already did a longer summary, Ken, but I thought I captured it pretty well with within this one word. I'm sorry, one sentence. One word summary would be great. But no, one sentence summary. After the success of The Waterboy, Sandler returns to the football genre, proving once again, in the words of Rob Schneider, not to be confused with Roy Scheider, right? You can do it! So I was glad to see Adam Sandler coming back to the football genre after about a decade.
And really way to nail the zeitgeist with your pick, Ken, because Rob Schneider has been back in the news because his daughter is a famous pop star
TikToker?
who's mad at him.
Okay.
Something.
Okay, well, I mean, she's got to be mad at culture for giving him any kind of platform the last 25 years.
Oh, yeah. He's terrible, and I really resent the fuck out of you making me watch this movie, but we can talk about that more later.
I mean, he is somehow the best thing about Judge Dredd.
The best thing about Judge Dredd is I am the law.
Okay, we've gone far afield, guys. We've gone far afield. You can get a 3-disc set of The Longest Yard, 1974, The Longest Yard, the Adam Sandler remake, and in between those two, in 2001, there was a film called Mean Machine, which is how The Longest Yard was released in Britain because they don't have yards or long. The Mean Machine being the 2001 movie, a European football, being a soccer movie.
Association football, I think, is how they refer to it.
Can I say that just as a setup, transposing this idea onto soccer, it makes much more. There's no mental gymnastics to figure out how there is a football team that is based out of a corrections facility, you know.
And you would later have, or sometime around this time, you would always have in hockey, like your bruiser, right? Like there's always been since this movie was well before I was ever born, but the idea of like a tough that gets brought in to just rough people up in a film, I guess has been with me ever since the Emilio Estevez Mighty Ducks movie.
Which is indebted to this movie as our most sports movies.
Yeah.
For real. All right.
But legit,
great, guys.
Why is this one thing I did not catch in the plot, why are they called the Mean Machine?
What do you mean?
Cool name.
It's a cool name.
Okay, I didn't know. I mean, it seems like they're convicts, they're prisoners, and I'm not sure how that go from that to Mean Machine as a name. Like they never seem to it doesn't seem to have reference to anything else in the film. I just want to try. I wasn't the only person missing that.
No, I don't think there is a reference, and maybe I'm wrong too, but I don't think there is a reference in the film. I just think that they are mean, and thinking about a football team as a machine is like because it's a component. Football is such a component of all the sports. It's the most. It's almost like a little corporation. Like everybody has their job on the field, and you run strategic plays together. And
the coach is the director.
Industrialized.
And I think Aldrich and his style of directing and producing is well suited to this type of movie and The Dirty Dozen, which we talked about last week, because
it's really the Associates and Aldrich is such like a socialist calling card as far as naming your production company that, but it really carries. He is such a team player.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine I would be fascinated to know what it was like to work with him on the set and stuff, but he really gives everybody their time, and there's no inessential pieces in his movies. Like, everybody who's on screen has a purpose to play, and they get to shine for a second, even in small parts.
Yeah, that seems really true. There's always that minor character who gets to pop.
Yeah.
But Ken, I think what you were going to set up there before I talked over you was there's something that happened between The Dirty Dozen and the movie The Longest Yard that was really important in Aldrich's life.
Yeah. So last week, Thomas mentioned as a teaser for this week that from the money he made from selling his stake in The Dirty Dozen, Aldrich was able to open his own studio, which was a dream he had. He had been an independent producer since following Kiss Me Deadly. He had ups and downs, but it was always his dream to have his own studio. And the movie we're talking about today is kind of a movie he needed to make after the failure of that studio, which I think you were going to talk about a little bit, Thomas.
Yeah, I mean, just from Aldrich, I mean, one of the things I get from Aldrich in his interviews, which if you're a Multnomah County Library patron, no shout out. Okay, cool. Robert Aldrich's interviews are available for borrowing. And in reading those, a couple of things stick out. And then part of that is just his financial understanding of movies as a business, and not shying away from talking about that. And like you said, like he says, he always dreamed about having enough money to have his own studio. He bought the studio that helped make The Big Knife.
Uh-huh.
His film that ran right after our first episode, Kiss Me Deadly. And it cost nothing to shoot there. It was like $100 a day. I made a lot of the money on The Dirty Dozen, so I took all that money and I bought it. I put in some cutting rooms. I built another stage. I bought a small Aeroflex equipment and a small boom and a small crane. It was a sensational operation. We only needed about 65 production days a year to break even. Then I followed that classy act by making 4 dogs in a row. Nobody's going to finance you after you make 4 dogs. Doesn't matter how big of a difference you can make in like the bottom line. They're just not going to give you the money. So yeah, he had the ball and he completely dropped it in the end zone, and somebody on the other team grabbed it. I think that's a sports metaphor for gridiron football.
Oh man. Thomas, that's the sexiest you've ever been.
Yeah, he ended up needing to like borrow money from the studios to develop the projects that he was making, and then he just folded everything down. But he did have an idea, or see, or believe strongly that films, like the cost of operations in California would price out the studios themselves to have to start going to smaller studios. Let's say in maybe Georgia or New Orleans or Toronto, or all the places that things are filmed now. He saw that happening in the 70s and with labor prices and land prices, and he jumped on it. And he had a good business sense, but kind of fucked up over 4 films. And he said, like, if you're like a Bergman or other, if you're more of I think he said Fellini and Bergman, if you're those people, it doesn't matter if you make flops. But in the business that he's in, he definitely needed to have a win. And he was really hoping that The Longest Yard was going to be that. And when it came out, not everybody knew that it was going to be a success. It was a very slow starter.
Can I just say, we talked a little bit about it off the air, but I saw part of The Killing of Sister George. And my dude, like, Coppola opens Zoetrope and makes just insanely out there ideas, totally untethered from any cares about the market. But if my dude Aldrich made a kitchen sink melodrama, an X-rated kitchen sink melodrama about a 50-year-old British soap opera star in the late 60s as a commercial pitch, Like, get the fuck out of town. Like, what the like, there was no way he was picking these studio movies thinking like, yeah, this one's a real Hummer. Like that's fucking insane. It's probably a great movie, but no one makes that movie thinking like, yeah, this is my blank check, guys. Watch out. We're going to roll in it.
Yeah, but so between The Dirty Dozen and then the year before, he made Flight of the Phoenix, also massively successful. He kind of made his name for a bit with movies populated by mostly men.
Yeah.
These are men movies. And it's interesting that the first two movies he makes with his at his studio are both very female centric. The main characters are women. Going back to the Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte dynamic. And it didn't work out.
People are fickle. So then he comes along and he makes The Longest Yard, a prequel to Saturday Night Lights and Oz.
Friday Night Lights?
I'm sorry, did I say? You know what? I don't understand how football works. I don't understand how Texas football works. Thank you for correcting me on the day of the week.
That's impressive as someone born and raised in Texas, and you don't understand football nor Texas football. I mean, that's a real... I don't like sport, but hats off to you, Longhorn.
Yeah, this and Hustle with Burt Reynolds that came out a year later would kind of be his last real successful movies that he had. He made a bunch of movies that people have never seen after that, except for me, maybe.
I really am excited to see Emperor of the North. That just, the description on that just makes me salivate.
Yeah, that's one with Lee Marvin and Ernest Borgnine again.
Thomas, Jack, the movie is just... Lee Marvin is the train conductor, and that fucking hobo Ernest Borgnine jumped on this train, and Lee Marvin is going to get that motherfucker off his train before the end of the movie.
No, you got it backwards.
Oh,
you got it backwards.
Even better.
Ernest Borgnine is the conductor, and it's probably the most sadistic Ernest Borgnine's ever been. He's like, nobody's riding my fucking train. This takes place during the Depression, and Lee Marvin's like,
the Great Depression.
Yeah, yeah,
not.
The other one, that mini death in the 70s. This is a gas shortage picture, Jack.
But that was one of the movies that preceded The Longest Yard, and one of the movies that didn't do well for Aldrich, which resulted in The Longest Yard, which is kind of him going back to prisoners getting together to have a mission, and a third act, or in this case, half the movie, taken up by that mission.
One of the things he said about the Dirty Dozen script, the $300,000 that they spent over, I think, 5 drafts, MGM, is that until he came along, there was no real humor in it. And so I guess he added basically napalm and humor.
Oh, wow.
And for this film, he says that he came along and there was a line that basically said, "And then came the game." And that's kind of like a description of the football game. And he was like, yeah, that's kind of like going to be my movie. It almost feels like there's a separate movie that starts up whenever the game starts. And some of that's because of the 61-day shoot. They took 36 of those days to just shoot the football scene, the game. And they used 6 cameras instead of the 2 that he normally used.
Wow. Yeah, that it really shows. There's a really interesting thing with both of these movies where, like, okay, so he's going to make The Dirty Dozen, and it's a hit book, and Bridge Over the River Kwai has been like this big masterpiece film and a blockbuster, real commercial success, epic 10 years before. And since then, in between the 50s and when Dirty Dozen's made, the like war adventure picture becomes like a B film exploitation genre where it's like okay to make just exciting movies that take place during World War II. Now you don't have to be really serious and po-faced about it. And he comes along and Dirty Dozen, even though it's got this background, it's really being positioned as that kind of like movie. And he really gussies it up and turns it into a very artistic film. Similarly, like Longest Yard seems to be building off Cool Hand Luke and the Southern prison exploitation movies that popped up after that. but it's taking all of that kind of cheap movie energy, and then introducing a bunch of new elements to make it into like, it should be, even in the script, it sounds like it's just a prison exploitation picture, and he turns it into like the first great sports film.
Mhm.
It's like, it shouldn't.
Wow.
It's a real. He's a real wizard with this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Thomas, he was brought in fairly late in this process because it was originally an idea that producer had, Ruddy, and had someone write the script before bringing Aldrich in. Am I getting the timelines correct?
I didn't watch on my Longest Yard Lockdown Edition DVD from the Multnomah County Library.
Mhm.
God,
Shout out.
we're just not doing it, are we? I'm gonna keep pushing. I'm just keep
Death of the
pushing.
shout out.
There's commentary by Burt Reynolds and writer-producer Ruddy, and I didn't listen to it because I didn't have time, and maybe I don't like this film as much as somebody else.
Whoa.
Ooh, shots fired.
Someone's gonna play the hill today, and I'll do it. I'll be the bad guy.
The opening of this movie is Burt Reynolds is wearing the most early 70s ensemble after he gets up and he's shirtless. He has
Low-rise pants.
Low-rise pants. He has a sugar mama, or vile strumpet, as Maggot might have called her from the Dirty Dozen. And they have a truly toxic relationship that is established pretty quick.
I mean, he does sum it up by saying, "I think the love has gone out of a relationship."
Uh-huh. And the violence that he has when she hits him, and then he grabs her face and pushes her in the wall and then throws her to the ground. That was the one thing that Reynolds was not sure about, but did anyway. And it's a hard way to start a movie and a character, even knowing that it's kind of about his redemption.
It's so how he follows that up with the car chase, and the way that Reynolds acts through the car chase. It goes from being, you just realize so quickly and through an exciting set piece that this is a person who is so depressed they are completely nihilistic. And I feel like for me that really offset the violence of how he treated the woman. Is like, oh, this is just he's basically trying to do suicide by cop.
Yeah.
So it's just, he just feels it's all over,
And I never understood the opening of Cool Hand Luke. Why Luke? This won't spoil anything for you, Jack, because it's the very beginning of the film. But he goes to prison because he's destroying parking meters.
Yeah.
My spouse Lee came in and asked, "Is this a Southsploitation movie?" And I said, almost. Like the first part of it, like almost if you drop like that onto Cool Hand Luke somehow, it almost gets to it.
Very much
until you get to the point of recruiting of the plot of the second football team of the scrimmage that's going to happen. But I never really understood that portion of it. But the opening of this film definitely has a sense of what Ken just said, of somebody who's at the end of their hope, like they have nothing really to live for. And I always thought it was, I assumed it was going to be because of an injury or something else. And whenever we slowly get the actual reason, and that reason is the part, is the backbone of the movie, and is the central conflict of the movie. It's an amazing script. It seems like it was made for Aldrich to make.
Yeah. And Reynolds spoke of this movie throughout his career as being one of the best experiences he had, and one of his favorite characters that he played. And Ryan, Hal Needham is the one who did the car chase, who would be Burt Reynolds' stunt double, who would then become Burt Reynolds' director, and a lot of people say is the inspiration for the relationship between DiCaprio and Pitt.
Yeah.
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yeah. Yeah. I can
Whoa,
definitely see that.
You brought up Tarantino?
Yeah, I didn't do it.
No. I was surprised that Ken was
an olive branch to my buddy Ryan.
I love that you hate him, and I love him. I don't. It's great.
King of the opening credits Aldrich waits 9 minutes to finish out the opening credits until Burt Reynolds is going to prison.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah. Yeah. The camera pans over in the start where you hear the football game in the background before he turns the game off. And she's like, hey, baby, let's get it on. And he's snoring. But my favorite thing about the opening is he pushes, after the car chase, he pushes the car in the water after escaping from the cops. And then there is a hard cut to cops saying, can we see your license?
Yeah.
And he's in the bar. There's nothing in between. You have to fill in everything in between, which isn't a lot. But there's no scene of the cops coming in the bar like you would normally see it. Just like, can we see your license and registration?
And then he goes, look at that, a miniature cop.
There's definitely Smoking the Bandit vibes coming out of that, which like that opening was very tough for me. And I think if I would only watch the first 20 minutes of the film and wasn't doing it for the podcast, I might have turned it off because it feels like Burt Reynolds doing Burt Reynolds.
Oh, I like that bit, but I definitely
but what's interesting though, the bartender's reaction to the potential violence from the cops.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that's a thing that kind of like set me off that this film wasn't going to be the film that I was expecting it to be.
Yeah.
Is that the bartender, doesn't feel like he can interfere and wants to interfere, even though we all know that Burt Reynolds isn't a great guy. The character isn't a great guy and is deserving of going to prison.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think the other cool thing about that car chase is that you see so many people, bystanders, like walking the street, like the sense of danger is there. It's not like a Fast and Furious where nobody ever dies.
Needham does the Buddy Van Horn thing of the person like, oh, which way do I go? At the last second, jump out of the way of the car, which is a fixture in car chases, I think, for decades.
Yeah. This intro reminded me in a weird way very much of Old Boy, because you meet Odaisu in that movie, and he is drunk at the police station, and you're only given like 5 minutes of screen time to set this whole guy's story up, and all that the director shows you is that he is a funny, disrespectful, drunken moron, and he similarly gets into more and more trouble because he keeps talking back and fighting the cops.
Interesting. Yeah, that's true. Odaisu also wins the football game at the end of Old Boy.
He does.
Yes, and Bernadette Peters is Burt Reynolds' daughter.
Oh,
When that guy gets
It all
on the
makes
line with the
sense.
hammer, it's amazing.
Bernadette Peters, the Beehive made me realize, because it's so silly, that she is just like the hottest lady who's just ever been. She's just fucking gorgeous.
Yeah, she is somehow weird looking, sexy, and cute all at the same time.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how she pulls off all that simultaneously, but yeah, and her main name is Miss Toot, which in a lesser movie
I didn't catch that.
could undermine the whole thing, but everybody's got a funny name in this.
Oh.
Miss Toot. So I'm gonna name my next dog.
It is a good dog.
This cast though, with obviously Reynolds, and then there aren't a lot of Aldrich's regulars in this, which after all the ones I've been watching the last couple of weeks is actually kind of nice. I like actors who appear in multiple movies from a director like Clint Eastwood. He has his little troupe, but it's also nice to see some new faces here. Eddie Albert, this is I think his second Aldrich movie. He's great as the warden. Truly onerous, odious. It's like, I think Jerry Jones, the owner of the Cowboys, probably watches this and thinks Eddie Albert is
He
the
really
hero.
does have Jerry Jones
Every
energy.
time he's like, Eddie Albert, that guy's the hero, right? Right, guys? And everybody's like, sure, Dad, sure.
I do think for me the biggest hurdle for the movie is this idea. I don't know anything about football, so the idea that there's like semi-pro teams and that you could have a company team based out of a prison, all of that just seemed very weird and implausible. But you meet Eddie Albert and it's like, oh,
it makes sense.
This guy's weird and crazy enough that of course like he would use this little fiefdom to do something insane, like have a football. It uses the implausibility against the characters just to show that like these are really perverse people to start with.
Mm.
Yes.
He looks
Thomas?
like no, I'm just thinking like Eddie Albert looks like he should be in a Lynch film as the villain.
Yes.
Yeah. Totally.
Oh, yeah. Bernadette Peters could definitely be in a Lynch film with
Oh,
that hair.
sure.
Or a Coen brother movie.
Yeah.
The woman Radiator, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah, so there was a 62 Hungarian film called Two Halftimes in Hell about some Hungarian prisoners playing a Nazi soccer team. Or I'm sorry, association football is what we're supposed to call it these days. That
Nazis?
that a lot of people feel Longest Yard borrowed from. It was called The Death Match, and I believe Sylvester Stallone
I'm
was
sorry.
in a...
Was it called Deathmatch? Was it called Deathmatch, or was it called Two Halftimes in Hell?
No, the game's like based on a true story was called The Death Match. So it's something that kind of maybe happened.
Oh,
as
okay.
These things often do. And Stallone made that movie. Was it Victory with Michael Caine? And that was a sort of remake. And then it is interesting that Vinnie Jones would make us proper soccer association football remake in 2001, 2002. But it all comes back around. But definitely the disgraced dude in jail who has to turn things around and coach a team is definitely from The Longest Yard. What is your problem with this movie,
Thomas?
I don't know. Okay, here's why it's not a perfect film. I think it does a lot of. I think it's that lead paint humor that I ascribe to like the dirty, not Dirty Harry, Clint Eastwood. Clint Eastwood, he's his character. The Clint Eastwood ape movies, where it's not exactly lowbrow. It's like a unibrow. I don't know, like knuckle dragging kind of humor.
It's meant to be like blue collar,
Yeah,
and crass in that way.
And it does. I don't think it spends a lot of time there, but I think that's where the thing I bump up against most in the film. But I do like the film starting with the football sequence immensely, and I almost never find this funny. I don't think I've ever found it funny in a film, but went back and rewound it, I think 3 times with Lee when they throw the football into that guy's nuts. And it's like, and I ran it back a couple of times just to see how it was constructed and why I found it so fucking great. And the entire time, my wife's sitting next to me, being like, let's watch it again. I can't. And then I let it play on, and they're like, "Oh, we're gonna run that play again." And I was like, "Oh fuck!" Now I'm just stuck in a loop. I'm just gonna keep watching this.
So wait, your problem with this movie is the lowbrow humor, and you rewound the nut punch?
Yes, exactly, right? Why I couldn't understand like why I was so into it, and so I had to keep watching it to understand why that started, like how that won me over.
I mean, there's a reason why in Idiocracy the only show they watch is Ow My Balls. But I definitely see your point. I think that's that scene gets at actually one of the things that I really love about this movie, and not being into sports movies or prison exploitation movies, like not having any reason to like this movie at all. It's hilarious the first time he throws the ball, and the second time it made me queasy, not only because of the identification with the guy who's getting his nuts hit again, but that they, and by extension, I am taking such pleasure in the misery. Like the cross line scene where he breaks that guy's neck and how they keep talking about it excitedly. That is so Lynchian and so upsetting for me, and yet so entertaining. Like the whatever that feeling is, like it's like MASH. So much of MASH, you watch it and you're like, these people are disgusting, and this movie is so great.
Yeah.
I actually
Sorry,
know the
Thomas.
appropriate term for that, and it's clothesline. And I only know that
which-
because I do laundry.
What did I call it?
Called it a cross line.
That's
It's a clothesline.
And as someone who grew up watching wrestling and loving Bret the Hitman Hart, I am very upset that I misspoke.
It's been illegal since late 70s.
I couldn't believe that it wasn't a penalty. I was like,
I know.
fucking are you kidding me right now?
But
So-
okay. Oh man. Okay, I understand. Like there's something tonally there that I think is what throws me off, right? Because you have brass knuckles and you're stepping on people and you're hurting people, and then when you're like, I broke a guy's neck, and everybody's like, no one takes it seriously. There's something befuddling.
The line is, I broke his fucking neck, and then everybody repeats it.
Yeah, Aldrich takes it seriously because they repeat it like 7 or 8 times. Like, he's like, this is fucking wild. Can you believe this shit that these dudes are doing right now?
Uh-huh.
Is that the reaction we're supposed to have? Maybe because you keep using the word fucking over and over again. That's why.
I'm excited. I'm sorry.
No, not you. No, the film. The film.
Oh,
does.
yes. Something just that I'm realizing. To me, Thomas, this movie captures the essence of 70s cinema in a way, even though it's not, you wouldn't throw it in with the Raging Bulls and Easy Riders necessarily, but just that like anti-authoritarian, but also like anti-authoritarian not just in theme but in expression, like putting stuff on screen that you as a participating member of the establishment, like we all are, it's like uncomfortable. You're like, there are moments in this movie where it breaks and it's like, oh no, he really threw that woman against the wall too hard, or he really did kill that guy. It's like it confronts you with its own rebelliousness. Whew. Sorry.
Well, we talked about the Dirty Dozen last week, which was 1967, pre-Richard Nixon, and then we're talking about Longest Yard, which is right as the whole
Watergate,
Nixon admission was falling apart. We were in the process of leaving Vietnam in disgrace. So culturally, at this time, nobody liked the establishment.
Yeah, that's great.
So this tapping into that, I mean, essentially Eddie Albert is like a Nixon stand-in, if you will.
Okay, but just a quick pin in that. Like
early Reagan.
There's a whole book
vibes.
called Nixon Land that helps support demographics that the majority of the country actually was not anti-establishment.
Is it?
Well, but this is, I think what Ken is saying is this is the nadir of Americans have never felt worse about being American than in 1974.
Yeah, and I guess the thing that struck me about this, and as I was thinking about the egg eating competition movie with Steve McQueen,
fuck you.
is there was something about the draft that makes it feel like prison movies are about the draft.
Mm-hmm.
It's you can't really control. Everybody's going to go to prison at some point. Everybody's going to be drafted at some point, and you're going to have to do your time. And how you do your time is what's important. And who you decide to give your, like the Wild Bunch. It's not who you give your word, but who you give it to, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what the better parts of this film, I think, capture.
Yeah, it's definitely got a nobody. I think Aldrich sincerely believes that nobody deserves to go to prison, no matter what they did.
Burt Reynolds, also a bit of a critic of the American penal system back in the early 70s, and he would congregate with the prisoners because they shot it in actual prison in Georgia, not in Florida.
Georgia, the state, not the country.
Yes.
Thank you for clarifying.
You're welcome.
Nick Cage should be doing a remake right now in Georgia.
Oh my God.
The country, not the state.
He was very, very kind to the prisoners. The guys who appeared as extras, he made sure that they got paid the same rate as an extra, like a regular extra on the street. He would have photos for him and the prisoners, and he would give for free, even though they cost money. And he would eat with them. So he was very genial towards them. And I think part of his warmth towards the making of this movie is part of that. Now, that being said, they built a practical stadium at the prison yard where they shot the football game, and then afterwards they gifted it towards the prison, and they attempted a prisoner guard game.
Oh, I'm so interested. Yeah.
Oh
No,
my
seriously.
God.
What the fuck happened?
It was
Oh my
it was
fucking
66-0 prisoners,
Yeah.
and they called the game
Holy
because
shit.
it was just too fucking brutal. Taking the shackles off and just letting them. It's like who's the dude from the Road Warrior?
Who's
got
the
him
dude
chained
from
up.
the Road Warrior?
The guy who's chained up, and then Lord Humongous has him on a chain.
Oh yeah, the Mohawk guy.
Mohawk guy.
Gay Mohawk guy.
Yeah. It's like that, and they just destroyed the guards, and they had to call the game, and then the stadium was never used again.
Wow. Amazing.
66-0 is like,
That's absurd.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that was possible.
It would have
that's like Alabama playing a high school team.
Yeah.
it would have basically the same effect without any of the guards getting murdered.
Yeah. So Jimmy Carter, who was the governor of Georgia, is famous for allowing them to shoot in a Georgia prison. It was an actual working prison. If you've seen the remake looks like it was filmed on Mars or something. It doesn't look like a prison. It looks like an old factory or some shit. It's a terrible location. This all looks practical, and you never feel that you're not in a prison.
Was Jimmy Carter the president too at one point?
Yeah,
Yes,
same.
later.
He became president. He became president because he allowed them to shoot the longest yard in Georgia.
I mean, basically.
Those single issue voters, man.
Yeah.
Uncle Jimmy. This is really fucking stupid, but Burt Reynolds' character's name is Nate Scarborough.
No.
And
His name is Paul Crewe.
oh, who's Nate Scarborough?
Nate Scarborough is the actor Michael Conrad.
Yes. Whenever they
whole-
said his name, I just imagined that he was TV personality Joe Scarborough's actual father. That's all.
He was not well liked on the set. Robert Aldrich used to call him the Polish princess, and it wasn't until his two things that you keep in here: your balls and your what else is it? What else do you keep in prison that they can't take away from you?
I thought it was just
Anyway.
balls.
That is two things. So after that scene, Aldrich stopped calling him the Polish princess, and because he did such a great job.
Uh-huh.
And they had I forget what the reward was, but he would give out little rewards every day when somebody would do something particularly good, which is
That's
a
adorable.
good managerial tactic.
Yeah.
So Caretaker's an interesting character in the movie, and I feel like him and Burt Reynolds in the middle of it when they're recruiting everybody feels like Smokey and the Bandit in temperament. The thing I didn't the guy who feels jilted, who is the pyromaniac,
Oh yeah, the rat.
Yeah. That fucking guy.
is able to have a light bulb bomb that kills him. I guess it was intended for Burt Reynolds' Wrecking Crew character, right? But that it could kill anybody just seemed kind of outlandish to me. And then that it disappears from the film. Like they have a funeral, then nothing.
Well, they have funeral, and then they're playing the game. That goes directly from one to the other.
Yeah.
But I guess
And at the end, they say for caretaker.
well, sure. And then in the middle of it, during the halftime, he's the warden uses it as leverage.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
But it just doesn't feel like it has emotional resonance. It feels like a piece of plot that
Oh, I love Caretaker. I feel like shit every time he dies. It's so horrible. The dude closes the cell, so
Yeah.
he's burning to death, and nobody can save him. It's horrible.
And it's funny that you bring up the light bulb thing because I think that has been used in other movies since. And I suppose it is. I was wondering where he got the needle. Everything else made sense to me, but that he was able to get the hypodermic needle to make it happen seemed a stretch. I did think, Thomas, and it's fascinating that you're having these reactions to these parts of the movie that I felt like were designed to pull you out and make you remember, like, these guys are in prison. Like, this is an exciting adventure movie, but like, people kill people in prison and nobody fucking cares. Was like that there are all these little moments in the movie to point and say, like, this is all actually horrible if you take a step back.
So the football game that is literally half this movie. Jack, you spoke to how much you love this movie. You're not a football fan.
Yeah, I am.
Well,
I don't really get it, but
So yeah, but what is it? What is it about the construction of this extremely long sequence that is so effective? You were actually clapping at points last night.
I don't really. I mean, I get the basics of football. I think football is pretty exciting, and part of the exciting part about football is the tribalism, where you're like, yeah, my guys are beating up the other guys. It's like the caveman brain, watching your tribe conquer the other tribe, you know. And watching this movie where there is a very distinct, and I guess we'll get to the ending, but there's a very distinct. You fucking hate the guards. Guards are treating main characters like shit through the entire movie. And then watching that, especially that midpoint in the football game, it's such a well filmed and constructed action sequence for one thing.
Mhm.
But then that midpoint, once they start playing dirty and start beating the shit out of the guards, is like just the most, serotonin injected straight into your eyeballs action sequence you could possibly have to conclude a film.
Yeah,
and then that's not even getting into all the split screen stuff. And,
he called them panels. He didn't like the term split screen.
Oh,
Aldrich.
fascinating.
Excuse me.
A comics thing. Fascinating. Okay.
And to Aldrich's credit, he shot this 1:33 because he didn't want all of that fucked up when it was on TV.
Wow.
Because if he had shot it widescreen or 1.85, it would he knew it would all get chopped up.
Wow.
Yeah, the panels are amazing, particularly the one at the end, the very end, when he, spoiler, scores the touchdown, and it silently goes to freeze frames of everybody's reaction. So fucking good, man. You can't help but want to stand up and cheer.
I think split screen is really the most underused technique. Like, it's so sophisticated, and when you see it done well in this or in a De Palma, it's like every movie should be functioning this way. Why? What type of pansies can't make a movie this way?
Because there's so much information that is conveyed of things happening simultaneously in a game. It's really a brilliant conceit that he builds off of, because it's not cutting from the game to the crowd. It's showing the game and members of the crowd and then cutting between them.
So for me, this section is one of the most subtly jaw-dropping pieces of filmmaking I've really ever seen, in the sense of it is incredibly exciting. I was bouncing up and down in my seat. I haven't felt that way watching an actual sport or a sport movie since, the first several times I saw Rocky and the Rocky movies when I was a kid and a teenager. And it's all a fake, right? It's like, it seems like it plays like a highlight reel of an actual excellent football game. No commercials, no pauses except for the very important timeouts at the end, But it's not a real football game. It's not taking place in a real stadium. The people on screen, while I assume there are football players doing the stunts, the people you're rooting for are not football players. To Jack's point, it's infused with all of this real life politics that Aldrich has been building into the movie over the first hour and a half. And then he shows you all the strings. He's like, we're going to have a football game now. There's no real stakes. It's got nothing to do with actual football. And then he makes you care about it. And at the beginning, he cuts to the queer cheerleaders, and it's like, oh, that's funny. Look, they're doing fake cheerleaders. But then by the end of the first quarter, they are real cheerleaders. And every time you cut to them, you're excited at the chants, and it's like, it only works because he is such a good filmmaker. None of it should be a failure of a movie. The idea on its face is absurd. And it is so powerful and so amazing that it, to your point, Ken, it makes the genre. But it's not like he's not doing 2001. He's not trying to give you the meaning of the universe. He's trying to give you a socialist, blue collar, entertaining sports movie. And it's just, he's like the Wizard of Oz. It's really, what a guy.
I had a weird comparison watching it last night, and it was James Cameron, and how he will often backload his movies with extended set pieces. And I consider this football game like an extended set piece.
Yes.
And everything that's built up to it is wrapped up into it narratively and character wise, but it all pays off in action.
Yeah,
It's
to that point, Hard Boiled, which is my favorite action movie of all time, is about the same length as this movie and also ends with a 45-minute action sequence.
Yeah.
That's almost half the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's what really the final football game is. It's some of it is filmed like an actual football game, which I find very amusing, and some of it is filmed like it's a shootout or something.
Yeah.
So they as Thomas said earlier, they used a lot of cameras to shoot it, and there was a lot of quote unquote real football, and ex-football players are in the cast as characters, like Ray Nitschke of the Green Bay Packers, who would be a Hall of Famer, plays the guy that gets the ball in the nuts twice, the guard. But there were when they were shooting it, they would actually huddle up, and Burt Reynolds would call plays that weren't necessarily scripted, and then they would run them, and in some of the commentary, he would point out which scenes that he kind of called in the huddle and that they didn't know what they were going to do. So they were playing like it was real. It's not a real football game, but as long as it took to shoot, that's why it comes off as feeling so realistic.
Yeah.
Whereas you watch a lot of like, if you've ever seen Any Given Sunday, Oliver Stone, which is a great movie, the football all looks fake. Last Boy Scout with Bruce Willis. I love Al Pacino in that movie. He's hilarious.
Yeah.
They all look fake because they're shot like regular movies, but they actually, like, their idea was to make kind of a fake football game and shoot it over the course of many weeks.
Yeah.
And then when it cuts together, it feels like a real football game.
Thomas, what are your thoughts on this final set piece here?
I mean, it's where I was most engaged and where I enjoy the film. I think that my favorite part of the film, and it's just the culmination maybe of everything we've been talking about, like, it's if the final set piece of the football game is the last act of a Cameron film, then there's like a metonymy, like an even more condensed version of that happens at the very end with the fake out of the game ball.
Yeah.
And I think it's some of the best writing, and it's shot and edited in a way that leaves this more substantial film than I imagine a Adam Sandler remake would have.
So in the script, he was supposed to shoot him.
It reminds me exactly of the end of Get Out, where if they had done the written ending, it would be such a less effective movie.
Yeah, totally. And that's what I was saying earlier, comparing this to the good Nazis in the Dirty Dozen. Yeah, it would have been so much less effective if that evil piece of shit guard that you've hated the whole movie just shot him. At the end, he hesitates. He doesn't want to do it.
Yeah, because they beat him fair and square. He has an admiration for him that you were not expecting from that character.
Yeah,
but
it is
not so much.
ending.
But not so much that he is like in awe, like you would. I feel like you would have in a film now.
Right.
Oh, he's
I see the wrongness of my ways. I'm giving up my guardship duty and becoming a prisoner.
And his line, "Stick that in your trophy case." It's hard to imagine having seen that movie so many times. I don't think I would have if they killed him, because his sacrifice, when he asked Pops, "How did it feel when you hit that guard?" And was it worth it?
Yeah,
and he said, "Yeah." And he's like, "Okay, I guess I'm going to be in jail for 30 years." Yeah, that's the great turning point of the redemption of his character. And when the movie gets so exciting when they're down by 22 points, and then they have that comeback. It's so fucking good.
It kind of Cool Hand, if he would have died, then it would have been more recalling Cool Hand Luke. And one of the things about Cool Hand Luke is, like, there's nothing that the individual can do to defeat the institution. And this is kind of saying, you can't beat the institution, but you can tell them to fuck off.
you can fuck them up a little bit.
Yeah.
It's the moral victory, even though they technically win. I mean, Paul Crewe as a character is definitely losing.
Yeah.
Most of his life behind bars now. And I think that is the difference between these movies, Slapshot, Bad News Bears, Rocky. I consider those the four great 70s sports movies where they're kind of moral victories at the end, and they're very anti-establishment, anti-authority. And I do feel that, having lived a very long life, obviously I watched Kiss Me Deadly when it came out in 1955. I'm in my late 80s, but I feel like those movies resonate with me so much because it feels more like life, where sometimes you have to take an L no matter how hard you try and make it some kind of moral victory that pushes you forward. Whereas like in the Mighty Ducks, when they win the game, it's just like, it's great and you're cheering, but it doesn't really feel like a life that I have lived. And what I love about those 4 movies is that they all feel like no matter how lovable you are and how much you try, sometimes, it just doesn't work out. And sometimes that's enough.
Well said.
Yes, very well said. And that's the feeling. I think that's one of the things I was trying to put my finger on, talking about how it felt so iconic for the 70s. It has that Schrader, that Paul Schrader side of attitude that the world sucks, but you still got to do your fucking best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
Totally.
murder everybody. Two choices.
Or sometimes
both. What you guys said about Big Jim is just rattling around with me. I mean, all of James Cameron's movies seem kind of based on these Aldrich blueprints as far as like taking a blockbuster, a very popular format, putting in realistic characters, giving it a real socio-political bent, so you're rooting for the little guy, and then just like an hour of action. And it's so, and who else besides like maybe Kubrick could Jim Cameron and Quentin Tarantino equally cite as being hugely influential to them? Like, just what a guy.
Yeah.
That's Stanley Kubrick, by the way.
Stanley Kubrick, director of The Longest Yard remake.
Yes. Starring Adam Sandler and Bob Fuck.
Oh yeah,
Bob
Fuck. Yeah. I didn't save it for the Lynch podcast.
Yeah, so Aldrich, after this movie, had he had that movie he did with Burt Reynolds, which kind of soured their relationship after the phenomenal shooting that they did in The Longest Yard, which Reynolds claims that Aldrich is not very good with humor, so they would do multiple takes where some of it would be straight from the script, and then Reynolds would do his quote unquote shtick, which I think might be your Smokey and the Bandit vibe that you're getting.
Yeah.
But Reynolds claims 65% of the movie is the shtick takes. But I feel like when you get into the Hal Needham era, it's so up his own butthole and so much of a character. But I think in The Longest Yard, because he starts off so onerous and really is facing a moral dilemma within the movie, that he has to make some hard choices for, it works in a way maybe it doesn't, like Smokey and the Bandit 2 or later works.
I mean, just considering how popular he was, it's always funny to me that Reynolds loved to blame other people for his lack of being more successful when he was successful, because like he could do anything he wanted and he chose to make Gator and shit, like he chose to make Smokey and the Bandit 2. Ain't nobody telling him he had to.
I think Smokey and the Bandit 2, if you've never seen it, has the best training montage of all time. I mean that in a sarcastic way, but it is funny. There's one scene where his character, and this is getting far afield, is at a horse race, and he is in one of the gates, and then it opens, and the horses are running with their jockeys, and then it's Burt Reynolds' character running against them.
I don't remember that. Only thing I remember from that piece of shit film is that they do a convoy at some point where all the semi trucks, like,
excuse me, that's Smokey and the Bandit 3.
No,
is that Smokey and the Bandit 3?
Smokey and the Bandit 2 has the Fury Road shit in the desert at the end. It's amazing.
I quite like Smokey and the Bandit 2. I've never seen the first one. I didn't know there was a third one until just now, unless this is the third.
The third one is led by the trucker, and it is a convoy. It's a straight convoy ripoff. There's no Burt Reynolds is not in the third one.
Yeah,
Convoy, great song, great movie.
I've never seen the movie, but I need to.
It's not very good.
It's pretty good.
Ernest Borgnine.
So swing back to this film. it was a slow burn. It took a while for it to pick up in the box office, and when it did, it went like gangbusters. But initially, this is from the Aldrich interviews. The critic at the New York Times was out Vincent Canby, and so somebody else, Nora Sire, cut the picture to ribbons, is what he says. So he goes on. Now, I've known Vince ever since he was at Variety, so I wrote to him. I don't care what you say about the picture, what you say about me, but Bert worked his ass off, and he was really dismissed, and I would really appreciate it if you could take a look at him. So Vince took a look at the picture, and a couple of subsequent Sundays later, he really kicked the shit out of Bert all over again. The moral of the story is, the smart thing to do is to keep your mouth shut and your head down.
But
Amen.
that's like Aldrich as the manager or coach / director. I mean, that's what you want. Somebody in your corner after the movie is made, going to someone saying, you can say whatever you want, but I mean, take a look at this again. Reynolds, I mean, I think this is...
Yeah, he did the
this
right
and Deliverance
thing.
are the two best Reynolds movies and performances.
Up until
Including
the remake.
Deliverance?
I said this and
Oh,
Deliverance.
I'm sorry. I heard something else. Okay.
And I don't think he has a mustache in either.
Well, he has half a
Coincidence?
mustache.
He and one of the lessons from the Aldrich films is that Bronson and Reynolds better without mustaches.
And Reynolds, he's got some sexy lips. I don't know why he was covering it up with a mustache so much of his career. He's much better looking without that thing.
He's got the Tom Hardy complex.
He always wants to cover his face.
They won't take him seriously if they know how pretty he is.
Yeah,
That's a good point.
very sexy man for sure.
Yeah. He should have just gone bald, let himself go bald, got rid of the wig. Anyway, Robert Aldrich, we want to sum up our Robert Aldrich experiences, these last 4 movies.
Here's something that occurred to me yesterday as I was out thinking about the last 4x4s that we did. Like a kind of his contemporary came in just a little bit after him and would continue making films afterwards is Frankenheimer. And I don't recall Frankenheimer having a single black actor in his films. I might be misremembering. Was there somebody in the Mind Control?
Seconds?
No.
Manchurian Candidate.
Manchurian Candidate. I might be wrong about that as I think on it. But the idea of race never really seemed to be part of his films.
I thought Denzel was in that, right?
That would be the
No.
remake, yeah.
I
Along with
I
Chris
think-
Rock.
I think you're right, Thomas, in that. Yeah, that's one of the things I love about Aldrich is not only in this period in Hollywood, if there were people of color or prominent female characters, then they were normally just super cliched. And if you didn't want to portray that, you like Frankenheimer would just leave them out entirely. The what we might call it now the Sofia Coppola strategy, and just pretend there were no black people in the Civil War. Anyway, so Aldrich is it's to not only include so many women and people of color in your films and have either them be active characters or have their negative treatment be like spotlighted in the movie is really, it would have been hard to do that in Hollywood, and that he is doing it in every one of his movies is like, to me, that's just a sign of a supermensch. You know, he's like going out of his way to do this, and he absolutely did not have to.
There's a remarkable scene in The Longest Yard, which is remarkable to me for what doesn't happen. And it's when the black prisoners finally come over to join in on beating up the guards and joining the team. There is zero conflict. All the guys who have been practicing, including a few bad dudes, they're all happy.
Yeah.
There's never like, oh, we're not going to play with those, what Telly Savalas as Maggot would call them. No, it's complete harmony. There's never any conflict. And I think it would be very hard for any writer or director to not address that, but it's not part of the story. The story is about something else. But
and not only that, but it's like the black inmates, the reason why they don't want to be on the team, that they can't trust him, is like the central conflict in the movie, is like whether he's going to. So not only are they not participating and then they're all in, but they were right to not participate. Like they are ultimately proven right in the course of the film to be skeptical of this white guy.
Yeah.
Promising them loyalty. Overall, just thanks for introducing me to
Yeah.
this Aldrich.
Me
This
too.
is like
Yeah.
my new. It's not since I got into my 4x4 subject, William Wyler, a couple years ago, that I found an older director I'm so excited to go back and rewatch. And some of these movies I liked more than other of these movies, but every single one of these movies I'm going to go back and rewatch again fairly soon because of how much I enjoyed talking about him. And you guys have made me enjoy his movies more than I did by talking about them. I like them more now than after I saw them. So that's very exciting for me.
Thanks.
Good.
Yeah, it was an eye opener for me too. I think I talked a couple episodes ago about Aldrich being at his best when he's the least sentimental, and I think that's held true. I think I've watched 14 of his movies this past month, and he always kind of falters when it gets into the Duvall. We didn't talk about Frank Duvall, who does the music for almost all his films, but like the scene where he's the lowbrow scene where he's putting the mud in the guy's boots.
Yeah.
And his pants.
That's like a slapstick.
Yeah. I mean, there are times where it reaches for something that I don't think he's totally comfortable with, and maybe that's part of like Burt Reynolds saying that he's not totally comfortable with comedy.
Yeah.
I think dark comedy he's great at, and satiric comedy. But other than
Meaningless
that,
Goof,
I mean, yeah, it's been a great rewatch for a lot of these movies, and I got to see movies I hadn't seen before too. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to share.
Kiss Me Deadly is, I think, maybe I'm forgetting a few, but it might be the best first watch of any movie I've ever had on the podcast before.
Whoa.
Yeah, I believe it. For me, that's
That
like
movie is amazing.
for me, it's like a top 5 American movie.
Yeah,
Seeing it again
totally.
this time.
Yeah, that was mind blowing.
So Aldrich ended up his career with some, like I said, some floppy flops. But his last movie, All the Marbles, is him returning to a similar setup to The Longest Yard of the Dirty Dozen, where it's not prisoners this time, but it's a couple of female wrestlers with Peter Falk as their down and out manager.
Wait, are these people who wrestle females, or is it women wrestlers?
It's women wrestlers who wrestle other women.
Oh,
yeah, and he's their manager, and they're driving around the most disgusting industrial landscape that America had to offer in the early 80s. And it's very similar to The Longest Yard, where it ends in a very, very long wrestling match that sounds terrible because I don't really like wrestling, but just like maybe The Longest Yard in football, I mean, I totally got into it. I remember I watched it with my wife, who doesn't like wrestling either. And she was totally cheering them on by the end of this wrestling match. So it has a very similar feel to it, even though it was very unsuccessful, because we were in the 80s and people didn't like down and out losers anymore, I think.
Yes, very much so.
But I would recommend that one and 10 Seconds to Hell, which is fucking great.
That's one of the last ones, right?
No, it's one of the early ones.
Oh, okay. What's the one where Lancaster storms the nuclear base?
Oh, Twilight's Last Gleaming is a trudge. I would not recommend it.
Okay, yeah, it looks bad on the box, but
yeah. I think they may have been going for something a little satirical mixed with something thriller-like, but it's not good. Thomas, do you have any final thoughts on Robert Aldrich?
I like the cut of the guy's jib in interviews. I like that he is financially based in his discussions of things, as opposed to strictly like I guess acknowledging the material reality behind the form that he creates, which I think is something that's often lost with directors. Because he being the head of the Directors Guild and then also having his own studio, I think, and being a producer on almost all of his films, brings something that seems a little bit different and refreshing from, like I think I said a few episodes back, an Argo episode. It's refreshing to have that as opposed to Christopher Nolan, who just seems like takes a mid-level country's GDP and puts it into a film. And doesn't really bat an eye. He says like, "Oh yeah, it was a middle of the road project for me. I decided to cut back a little bit." And there's things like at the end of this interview that came out in '78. The interview the interviewer saying to him, "It's been a good talk," and Aldrich says, I'm sorry I haven't been funny, and I wish I was more profound, but you got the wrong follow. And it's just something like, disarming about him just seeming to acknowledge players around him, the actors around him, and the effort that it takes to put a film together and appreciating it in other people. I think that his fight and his coming up and continual fight to make movies is somewhat reflective in that spirit of give them hell.
I wasn't going to bring it up, Thomas, but that is coming off a great point that you made. For a podcast that is really based in kind of the auteurist idea, Aldrich is the first director that we've covered, at least since I've been here, that is vehemently anti-auteurist. He is a Marxist filmmaker through and through. I think he would say "fuck you" to the auteurist stuff, and it's fascinating how that does manifest in his work.
I would put Eastwood and Frankenheimer in that same camp.
Great point.
Especially Eastwood, who had his production company and would often make movies. Well, he loves to work, but also just to keep those people working. He was very much like the coach, keeping his team together, making sure they had a movie to shoot once a year. Very much the financial part of it, like Thomas was talking about Aldrich. I mean, Eastwood had always come in under budget and shoot it quicker than it needed to be. And his movies were easy to reach profitability because of that, because they were so cheap and he had a business mind.
Yeah, and I got a little bit of that vibe from Ford as well. I think people maybe who came up through the studio system had a little bit more of that, because all of a sudden they had the studio that was taking care of them and taking care of the actors around them gone. So if you came up during the 20s and 30s, like that shift, I think cognitively shifted a little bit of how people experience the world, experience making movies.
Yeah,
I think it's a great comparison, Thomas, because Ford was very. I wouldn't say he was right wing, but to the extent that Aldrich and Frankenheimer were left wing, Ford would have been like the conservative, star power broker in Hollywood, making conservative pictures with conservative ideas and conservative actors. And those two guys, Aldrich and Frankenheimer, are over on the side doing the same thing with an opposing ideology. But you're right, very much a similar approach to movie making. And Clint, also conservative, but really treating his team in that way. That's a great call out too, Ken.
That's John Ford, for anyone wondering.
What did I say? Henry?
Tom Ford, the
Tom Ford?
Director,
fashion icon.
Harrison icon.
Ford?
Yeah.
Harrison.
Never met a button he liked. So that's it for Robert Aldrich, our first 4x4 of the season.
Woo! Who are we doing next, Weiler?
In 2 weeks, if you want somebody who was very cognizant of the financial part of filmmaking, you'll be very disappointed that we're doing Lars von Trier in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
No shit, really?
Did we figure out all the movies, Thomas?
Thomas, what are the two first films for von Trier?
Element of Crime and Dancer in the Dark.
Yeah. Oh, that's going to be a hell of a double feature.
Let's do it.
I've never seen any of Element of Crime, and I've only seen the first hour of Dancer in the Dark, so this will be very exciting.
Wow. So the lights were still on when you turned it off.
Yes. I walked out of the room when somebody else was. I had to go to work. It wasn't.
I think my love for Bjork outweighs my hate for Lars von Trier just a little bit. So I'm extremely
This will be a tough one.
Yeah.
If are we doing Antichrist?
Not to spoil anything, but yes, we're doing Antichrist.
That's going to be our Christmas episode this year.
We're not doing the fucking house that Jack built, are we? I fucking hate that movie.
Well,
so stupid.
I think
it's the boss baby, right?
Yeah, Boss of Us All instead. But we'll do the house that Jack built for Halloween. How about that, Jack? Just so you can special episode.
You can do it without me.
Yeah, he just took off his headphones, walked out, stormed off. Good job, Thomas. Well, thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you, Weird AI, for our theme song.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And if you want to follow us, we're on all the normal socials. Also part of the Good, the Pod, the Ugly network is Touchback, our dating site. First Down and Inches to Go, also our dating site. Balls Deep, our expose on the exotic world of underwater quinceañeras and debutante balls. Debutante, I think, is how most people say that word. Yeah, and we have things like bleacher creatures for our laundry enthusiasts out there, and Hat Trick Bateman, our site where we bring together full Monty fans and fans of American Psycho. So we're doing a lot out there. Oh, how about our podcast? How about our podcast, Lock Her Up, where we tour Scottish lakes while we discuss Orange Is the New Black.
Do you have more?
I do, but they're not very good. If you think that those are bad, they only get worse.
Subscribe to our Patreon, and you can hear them.
No one's gonna do that.
I have a Patreon. All right, thanks, you guys.
Thanks, dudes.
Together, that makes us Flash Gorgeous.
Flash Gorgeous.
I'm not talking at you. I'm talking to you.
Flash Gorgeous.
I don't want to hear about you. I want to hear from you.
It's 10-4.
10-4, buddies. Destroy. Kill all hippies.
I don't hate it. I just don't know why you strayed from the formula.
You bastards! You don't know it, Bob. I'm an artist! And I must reflect that in my rhyme.
Thomas, that's the sexiest you've ever been.
What type of pansies can't make a movie this way?
People are fickle.